Bees and blueberries in Atlantic Canada. Wild blueberry is a major crop in eastern Canada that depends on insect pollination. The majority of this pollination is carried out by bees. Due to this, in Atlantic Canada, the working relationship between bees and blueberries and beekeepers and blueberry growers has been ongoing for many years. Every year, thousands of honeybee colonies are rented from beekeepers by blueberry growers and moved into blueberry fields to carry out the task of pollinating blueberry flowers in order to maximize the fruit crop yield. Honeybees are not the only bee species employed for blueberry pollination. In some fields, bumblebee colonies and alfalfa leafcutter bees are also often moved in to increase the pollination workforce. Bumblebees are effective in blueberry pollination due to their ability to perform a specific pollen foraging technique called buzz pollination, where they shake the blueberry flower, causing a greater release of pollen than other bee species are capable of. Alfalfa leafcutter bees are well adapted to our climate and are better able to forage at relatively low temperatures compared to honeybees. Honeybees are effective in blueberry pollination thanks to their populous colonies and generalist style of foraging abilities, meaning they are able to forage from a wide variety of floral sources instead of specializing on a small proportion of plant species. Given the low population of native pollinators and the high demand for pollination services on wild blueberry crops, honeybees are a common and important resource. Regionally, the current demand for pollination exceeds 50,000 colonies, and this is expected to increase. This represents over $8 million per year in income to Atlantic Canada's beekeepers. Although we have seen an increase in the number of beekeepers across the Atlantic provinces, the number of beekeepers supplying hive for pollination services has reduced. Increasing both the number of beekeepers providing pollination services and the number of colonies managed for this purpose has become a priority of both beekeeping and fruit production industries. When beekeepers and blueberry growers agree to use honeybee colonies for wild blueberry pollination, the use of a contract is recommended and should include specific details on the number of colonies required, the timing of placement and removal, who is responsible for providing and setting up protective fencing around the hives, the agreed on hive strength standard, hive inspection entitlement and arrangements, the location and access for delivery of hives, and any details concerning agrochemical use. As honeybees are managed pollinators, beekeepers and blueberry producers can be coordinated so that pollination services occur in optimal conditions for both plant and pollinator success. This coordination is supported by following a hive strength standard that sets a minimum requirement for the strength of honeybee colonies being used in pollination. It is important to note that the use of a hive standard for hive strength is not only beneficial in the case of wild blueberry pollination, but also in cases of other crops where honeybee colonies are employed to carry out pollination services. Hive Strength Standard. A hive strength standard sets guidelines for the minimum strength requirements for colonies being used for pollination, where colony strength is a measure of the population size and also the population structure of the colony. In other words, is there a queen that is actively laying? Is there sufficient numbers of foraging workers for resource collection and house bees to support brood rearing? All measures that impact how successful a hive would be in contributing to the pollination of a blueberry or other fruit crop field. Often, many hives are brought to a blueberry field together to perform the task of pollination, so the hive strength standard is considered as an average among all hives involved, with some colonies being above and some perhaps slightly below, but ultimately evening out to achieve the hive strength standard for pollination. The determination of hive strength and a hive standard is an often discussed topic in relation to the pollination of wild blueberries. There are acceptable standards recommended by provincial governments and national organizations, some of which are specific to the crop being pollinated, and some that are more of a general standard for pollination. A review of available hive standards demonstrates a range in the measures and criteria used to establish this benchmark. For the purpose of this video, we will discuss hive standards set by the following 4 organizations. First, we have the Canadian Association of Professional Apiculturists, or CAPA. Then we will look at the Nova Scotia Beekeepers Association, or NSBA, Hive Standard, followed by the New Brunswick Department of Agriculture, or NBDA Hive Standard, and then finally, the Hive Standard set by the University of Maine. The measures used to develop a hive standard are listed across the top of the table and include frames of bees, amount of brood, number of hive bodies, number of bees, and under additional comments, we can see that some standards consider presence of a laying queen and number of honey frames. Not all of these measures are included in each hive strength standard, but it is important to understand the reasoning behind each of these requirement factors. Frames of bees is an important consideration as this indicates the population of worker bees available in the colony to perform pollination services. The amount of brood is measured since it indicates the productiveness of the queen and how well the colony will be able to sustain the population of foraging or pollinating worker bees. The number of hive bodies is important to consider since this determines how much space the colony has to support brood rearing and resource storage, both of which are key factors in maintaining colony strength. The number of bees is a consideration to include and similar to the number of frames of bees, as it indicates the population of worker bees available to contribute to the pollination workforce. Some hive strength standards explicitly state that a laying queen must be present, as this ensures that brood production will continue throughout the pollination time frame. Some hive strength standards also require a certain number of honey frames to be present in hives being used in pollination, which is important especially in the case of wild blueberry pollination, since honeybees do not often collect substantial amounts of nectar from blueberry blooms to maintain optimal colony strength. All of these measures directly relate back to the strength of the colony and so are used to create these guidelines for hive strength standards. The Canadian Association of Professional Apiculturists, or CAPA, produces a document entitled A Guide to Managing Bees for Crop Pollination. In this publication, there is guidance on a colony standard for pollination. It suggests that a colony should have a minimum of 8 deep frames fully covered in adult bees and 5 to 6 frames of brood in all stages of development. They go on to clarify that 50% of the frames should be covered by brood and all should be housed in 2 standard deep Langstroth hive bodies. It must be stated that this is a generic guideline, not specific to wild blueberries, recommended for the pollination of orchards, but nonetheless still insightful. The Nova Scotia Beekeepers Association, or NSBA, has a fact sheet available outlining a standard for honeybee colonies used for pollination. Available on the NSBA website is a clear, concise statement suggesting 4 frames of brood, 8 frames of bees, 2 frames of honey, and 1 laying queen. Although not stated as specific to wild blueberries, this is endorsed by the Wild Blueberry Producers Association of Nova Scotia as a minimum standard. For recommendations specific to blueberry pollination, there are additional standards available. The New Brunswick Department of Agriculture, Aquaculture, and Fisheries has an excellent fact sheet which provides guidance on a standard pollination unit entitled Evaluating the Strength of Honeybee Hives. Although this fact sheet contains information related to assessing hive strength, There are also guidelines which create a standard for pollination. Generally, it states that a standard hive should contain at least 2 boxes, a laying queen, brood, and 25,000 to 30,000 honeybees. Further along in the document, there are additional details. It is stated that honeybee colonies used for blueberry pollination should have 6 to 10 frames with a variety of brood coverage present. The University of Maine publishes a comprehensive guide called Honeybees and Blueberry Pollination. This document states that a colony for pollinating blueberries should be housed in at least a 2-story hive, preferably 2 deep hive bodies, containing at least 30,000 bees, and have 6 to 10 full frames of brood in all stages of development. Methods of assessing hive strength. Experienced beekeepers can get a good impression of the strength of a colony through their own methods, but there are specific methods used to quantify specific aspects of hive strength for the purpose of comparison against a pollination standard for hive strength. These methods include various ways of quantifying frames of bees and also quantifying brood cover. Frames of bees can be measured 3 ways: by visually inspecting the bee coverage on each frame, by performing a seam count, or by counting the number of flying bees returning to the hive during a set time frame. Quantifying frames of bees provides an estimate of the population of the colony, which can be used to determine whether the criteria for number of bees is satisfied according to the hive strength standard. Brood cover is quantified through brood assessments. This is important since brood production is what determines the proportion of workers that contribute to the pollination workforce, and also because the presence of uncapped brood stimulates foraging worker bees to collect pollen and thereby provide pollination services. There are various methods that can be performed to quantify brood in a hive, including counting square inches of total brood, quantifying percent brood cover of all brood on frames, or using these methods to yield specific quantifications of brood at each development stage. These methods of assessing brood in a hive helps determine whether the criterion for brood is satisfied according to the hive strength standard. In a past ADA research study, results showed that hives sent to pollination meeting the pollination standard grew well and did consistently better than weak hives, showing that there are benefits to both the blueberry grower and the beekeeper to send hives into blueberry fields that meet the pollination hive standard for wild blueberry pollination. The standard of hive strength is also important as it is a contributing factor in determining how many hives should be used per acre of crop that requires pollination, also known as the stocking rate or stocking density. Present and future ADA research aims to provide beekeepers and blueberry growers with more regionally specific guidelines for the pollination of wild blueberries by managed honeybee colonies. This works to ensure both beekeepers and blueberry growers are hitting the sweet spot between the cost of managing and renting honeybee colonies for blueberry pollination and the benefit of increasing the abundance of insect pollinators by means of managed honeybee colonies in wild blueberry fields.